This has been a slow and difficult process. One of the main difficulties has been that the major road into this part of Enga province, where the worst devastation occurred, has been cut by landslips. And so the Australian government, New Zealand government, the Papua New Guinean government and others have been trying to work out the best way to clear it. Now, the Papua New Guinea's Defence Force has been trying, but it is difficult work. So now a nearby gold mine has said that it will help with some of its heavy moving equipment. So it's going to bring that equipment in. Hopefully that will clear the major road into the worst affected areas, and that will make it much easier for larger amounts of aid and support to flow into those affected areas. At the moment, people who want to get in there are very dependent on the planes and helicopters that have been deployed by the Australian Defence Force as well as the PNG Defence Force to get in there. Obviously, it'd be much better to get in there by road, so hopefully that can happen. Meanwhile, of course, people are still searching for survivors. In many cases, they're still digging with shovels, with sticks, with their hands to try and get through the rubble. But really, given it's 6 to 8 or maybe even in some places 10 metres deep, you really need that machinery in there to make a substantial difference.
The scale of this devastation is just so large, isn't it, Stephen? Just with respect to what we mentioned earlier about the other villages and the safety of those people in there, just how many people may have to be evacuated from those nearby villages in the Enga province?
Look, we don't know at this stage. We believe that it's something in the order of 8,000 to 10,000 people who are in nearby settlements that might be at risk of further landslides. Now, Papua New Guinea's government says it's begun the work of moving some of those people, but it hasn't given a firm figure yet of how many have been moved. And some of those people have told local media that they don't want to leave, that they don't believe there's any real risk, and that it would be very disruptive for them. So it's not clear exactly how many people will be forced to move in the end and how many might stay in place. One of the difficulties is that it's really difficult to gauge just how significant this risk is. How likely is it that we might see further landslips? We have heard, just from some of the pictures we've seen coming in, rocks still skittering down the slopes. It's an unsettling and terrifying sound, you can imagine, for those on the ground. But at the moment, one geotechnical engineer from New Zealand is either on the ground or about to get on the ground to provide more assistance. There's also a disaster response team from Australia. Hopefully, when some of those experts get on the ground, they'll be able to make more sophisticated calculations about exactly what the risk is and how many people might need to be moved. But it's a huge undertaking and a really difficult one for a government that's already facing really considerable strains on its resources.
When the landslide first happened, I mean, there was talk of there being around 4,000 people in the village, which was a number a little bit higher to usual because there had been some tribal conflict and they were housing some of those others near them. Are we any closer to knowing exactly how many people may have been killed in this disaster?
Kath, not at this stage. Unfortunately, almost a week now since the devastating tragedy, we still simply do not know how many people are buried underneath the rubble. Now, that might seem surprising to people, but it is worth remembering this is a very remote part of Papua New Guinea that is difficult to reach. And the situation in the wake of that landslide would have been really, really chaotic. On top of that, it's also worth remembering that, as you mentioned in the introduction, a lot of people were coming into this settlement during the time of the landslip. So it's not just the simple matter of doing a head count in this settlement. You also have to go to nearby villages to see who might be missing. Now, Papua New Guinea's government is still notionally talking about 2,000 people who might be dead. That is a much higher figure than anyone else is using. The United Nations has said that around 670 people might be lost. And then local officials, including one local official very close to the epicentre of this disaster, which the ABC spoke to yesterday, is giving a much lower figure. He told us that he believes that after a final head count, the final death count might be much lower, perhaps around 164 people. Now, even if it's at that very lower end of the spectrum, this is still obviously a devastating loss of life, but obviously it would be immeasurably better than that 2,000 who were originally feared dead. The brutal reality is that we may have to wait some time before we get a really clear idea of how many are actually lost, and we may never get absolute clarity even in the coming weeks.
A huge tragedy. Stephen Jedgetts, thank you.